All right, today we're diving into something really important. How can the hidden, invisible scars of trauma become, well, powerful, undeniable evidence in an immigration case? It all comes down to a very specific kind of psychological assessment.
So let's start with a really tough question, a central challenge. Imagine your entire life, your future, depends on telling your story. But the trauma you've gone through, it makes it almost impossible to even speak about it. So how on earth do you prove a story that's just too traumatic to tell?
You know, this fundamental problem leads us straight into something you could call the credibility paradox. See, the legal system, it wants a clear, consistent story, A to B to C. But that's not how trauma works. Trauma fractures memory. It can completely shatter a narrative, which makes telling the absolute linear truth incredibly difficult.
Just think about the psychological impact for a second. Trauma doesn't just make you sad, it can literally fracture your memory into disconnected pieces. It might cause someone to seem, well, almost emotionally flat while describing something horrific. Or they might mix up dates and times. Now, if you don't know what you're looking for, that might seem suspicious, right? But to a trained clinician, those are the classic telltale signs of trauma.
So the big question is, how do we bridge that gap? You've got this personal, fractured reality on one side, and the legal system's need for cold, hard proof on the other. While the answer is a specialized mental health assessment, it's basically a professional translator, turning those invisible wounds of trauma into credible, objective evidence that the system can actually understand.
And just so you know where this info is coming from, the process we're breaking down here is based on the work of specialists like Canada Therapy and Wellness. These are the clinicians who work right at that intersection of mental health and immigration law.
Okay, this is absolutely critical to understand. This assessment, it is not therapy. Its goal is evaluation, not treatment. And that final report, it isn't confidential, it's evidence for a case. The clinician's job isn't to judge whether a story is true. Their job is to professionally assess the person's mental state. Big difference.
This entire process is built on a really important principle called trauma-informed care. So what does that mean? It means the person's safety and their sense of control are the absolute top priority. The clinician gets it. They know that retelling these events can be re-traumatizing. So the person telling the story is the one in the driver's seat. They control the pace, they can take breaks whenever they need to, and they're always treated with dignity.
Okay, so what does this journey actually look like for someone going through it? Well, it's a very structured path, and it's all designed to do one thing: make the invisible impacts of trauma visible.
It usually unfolds in 4 main stages. It kicks off with a referral from a lawyer. Then it moves into a couple of really in-depth sessions. And finally, it all comes together in a big, comprehensive report. So yeah, this is a methodical journey, not just a one-off chat.
And it all starts with the person's own story. That first session is really all about listening. Listening to their history, their journey, everything they've experienced. This is where that very human story becomes the bedrock for all the clinical evidence that comes later. But it's not just about the story. To give that narrative real legal weight, clinicians have to pair it with some scientific rigor. They use standardized, internationally recognized assessment tools to objectively measure the symptoms the person is actually describing.
So for example, they might use tools like the PCL-5 for PTSD symptoms or the PHQ-9 for depression. And look, these aren't tests you can pass or fail. Think of them as standardized tools that help translate subjective feelings, how you feel, into objective data. And that's the kind of data a legal system can really understand and use as evidence.
And this whole journey, all these steps, they lead to one critical thing: the professional report. This is the moment where the personal story, the clinician's observations, and all that hard data come together into one single, powerful piece of testimony.
And how it's used is very strategic. For example, in a refugee hearing, the report's main job is to support credibility, to show the story adds up. But for something like a humanitarian and compassionate application, the focus shifts. There, it's all about documenting the incredible hardship the person would face if they were forced to leave, showing just how much their mental health would suffer.
But the real secret sauce, the power of this report, it all comes down to one word: nexus. What's that? It's the critical professional link that connects the dots. It connects the events a person described to the symptoms the clinician is observing. It's the expert opinion that basically says, yep, the psychological evidence we're seeing here is totally consistent with their story.
And this brings us right back to that key idea we talked about earlier. The report's power comes from its objectivity.
See, the clinician isn't an advocate who's just arguing for their client. They're an expert presenting their honest professional findings. And it's that integrity, that honesty, that makes the report so credible and persuasive to a judge or an immigration officer.
So let's just zoom out for a second. Why does any of this matter so much? I mean, beyond all the legal strategy, this whole process provides something that is profoundly human. It offers validation, and it offers dignity, especially when you're dealing with a system that can often feel pretty cold and impersonal.
So really, the biggest takeaway here is that this is about so much more than just paperwork or winning a case. It's about making sure a person's suffering is actually seen, that it's understood, and that it's validated by a professional. It creates a formal record that says, loud and clear, what happened to you was real and its impact on you is real. It makes sure that a story that's so hard to tell is finally truly heard.
When you think about it, this whole process is about building a bridge, right? A bridge from someone's inner, chaotic world to an external system that demands proof. And that kind of leaves us with a bigger question to think about. What other invisible struggles out there in our society need a bridge just like this one to finally be seen and to finally be understood?